As I said a little while ago in brief remarks, I don't know of a single member, at least I don't believe there's any, who takes any pleasure in being involved in this debate, involved in a vote we're about to cast here, knowing that the problems that have created this situation were avoidable, preventable, and had the administration been paying more attention when they were asked to more than 2 years ago about the foreclosure crisis in this country, that is the root cause of the problems we're now dealing with, then we would not have to be here today. And that's not hyperbole, that's not speculation, that's a fact. But the realities were that there was denial after denial after denial, that the economy was sound and solid and things were going to be in great shape no matter what happened. And today we find ourselves with 17,000 people a day losing their jobs in America. Between 9,000 and 10,000 homes are going into foreclosure every day in the country. Retirement accounts are being dwindled down to almost nothing in too many cases. The cost and other matters are rising for many people, and we are in the most serious economic shape since the Great Depression. This is a dreadful moment. It is a sad moment that here in the first hours of the 111th Congress, instead of talking about resources that go to building bridges and roads or schools, making a difference in the health care of people, providing some decent retirement and hope for other Americans, we're talking about providing resources to stabilize our economy, to get our credit system working again, so that you don't find the squandering of resources, to see that we might make a difference in putting a tourniquet on the hemorrhaging of home foreclosures that is occurring from one end of this country to the next. It's obviously easier for those who can stand here and say, well, I told you so, we shouldn't have done this, because it is impossible to go back and say what would have happened with any great certainty had we not acted. And I think much can be said here today. When you have an outgoing Republican president, administration, and incoming Democratic administration with very different views about how our economy ought to be managed, ask us jointly to step up and make this decision, I think it's important we listen and we act. And that's what I'm urging my colleagues to do. This is not going to win you any parades. You're not going to get a plaque or a medal for doing this. And I have great respect for my friend from Oklahoma, but I would predict just the opposite of what he has suggested. I think history will judge us, just as they judged 2 generations ago, when a new Congress gathered in the winter of 1933, after the election of 1932, and 5,000 banks closed their doors. 27% of the American people were out of work. There was no hope whatsoever. And because people got together and fused capital into lending institutions, the 5,000 of them in the spring of 1933, and creative people sat down and worked and tried to come up with imaginative ideas to get this country moving again. And an American president stood on the east front of this Capitol and said to the American people, you have nothing to fear but fear itself. And hope began to spring in the hearts and minds of Americans all across this country. Because while they were suffering terribly, they knew they needed a government that was going to roll up its sleeves, keep an eye on them, keep them in mind every single day to try and get this country moving again. And that letter, I think, ought to provide some confidence to members who are concerned about how this program will be managed and run, and will, in fact, be run differently than the previous or the present administration is doing it. So this is a tough vote to cast, as it was in September, in October. And I listened that night as the majority leader asked every single member to vote from their desks, something we don't do with great frequency here. And I listened to several of our colleagues who are no longer here. And I suspect that that vote they cast in favor of that program had something to do with the outcome of their elections. And I'm sorry that happened to them, and it may have happened because of that vote. But we're United States senators. This is not a place just to come and give speeches. And we happen to be here at one of the most critical times in our nation's history. There are wars raging around the globe, and people are suffering here at home. And we have an obligation to them. And sometimes the decisions we make aren't always the most popular ones in the moment they're given. And we've learned that throughout history, too. That the Congresses in the past who've come before us, that had the courage to stand up and face the realities of their day, have enjoyed the good judgment of history because they had the intestinal fortitude to do so. There's not a single one of us in this chamber today who knows what the right political vote is to cast. We all know how we can gain favor overnight by casting a vote against this. My hope is there'll be at least 50 of us here that'll stand up and cast a better vote for your children and your grandchildren who won't know the outcome of your vote because they probably aren't alive yet or couldn't read it. But someday they're going to look back and ask what we did at this critical time to make a difference in our nation. And I believe we're in such a moment. We're in such a time. And it's not just this moment. There'll be a series of them in the coming weeks and months. That's why you sought this office, I presume, to be a part of making history and making a difference.